Sir, good morning.
A very refreshing and warm good morning to all of you. On this beautiful morning, I, Rutuja, would extend a hearty welcome to each one of you present here. Today, we are having a distinguished personality and an eminent speaker with us, Professor Kishore Kulkarni, sir, Metropolitan State University from Denver, Colorado, United States. Namaskar,
Yeah,
sir.
how are
I
you?
extend a warm and hearty welcome to you, sir,
You're
on
joining with
behalf
yourself.
of Prerna College of Commerce.
What is
India
it?
has emerged as the fastest growing major economy in the world and is expected to be one of the top three economic powers in the world over the next 10-15 years, backed by its robust democracy and strong partnerships. However, COVID 19 has put our economy on the back foot and the country is passing through a phase of economic crisis. It is true that the government of India has initiated many important measures to put the economy back on the right track to help the nation move forward even during the prevailing pandemic situation. However, it is necessary for common man to know what exactly is the economic scenario in the country at present and how far the measures taken so far will help us and to what extent and what more is expected to be done in near future. Recently, Finance Minister Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman bring the economy back on the right track announced various measures which includes rupees 900 crore grant to the Department of Biotechnology for COVID-19 vaccine research. She also said that rupees 10,200 crore additional budget outlay will be provided towards capital and industrial expenditure for domestic defense equipment, industrial incentives, infrastructure, and green energy. Along with that, she announced a payment of cash in lieu of LTC and rupees 10,000 festival advance to government employees to stimulate consumer demand during the festival season and boost the economy. She also announced an additional capital spending and rupees 12,000 crore 50-year interest-free loan to states to boost the economy that has been battered by the pandemic and the resulting lockdown. With a view to focusing on this and many other aspects concerning the present economic scenario in India, like the challenges before our economy and remedies to bring our economy at level. Prerna College of Commerce has organized a talk by eminent professor and well-known economist Professor Kishore Kulkarni sir, Metropolitan State University, Denver, Colorado, who has kindly consented to enlighten us on this topic. Before we get started, I would like to invite Dr. Praveen Joshi, sir, the Director of Prerna College of Commerce, to please present an introductory remark. Over to Dr. Praveen Joshi, sir.
Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure that a very eminent economist, a very distinguished professor who has a very long experience and who has studied economics in all of its depth and breadth is here with us this morning to enlighten us on the current economic scenario in India. In fact, our economy was on the right track. We were making a lot of progress. But this pandemic, it has derailed our economy to a great extent. During lockdown period and even after that, many industries, almost every industry was closed. All the business houses were closed. Every commercial establishment had become non-functional. Every source of income for the government was no longer there during the lockdown period and during this pandemic. So government had to shell out a lot of money in order to meet the needs of all those who are jobless. who had been out of employment, providing them food and basic necessities was the responsibility of the government. So huge package was declared by our Honorable Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi. Still, we have so many problems as far as our economy is concerned. Though the government has been trying its best to boost up our economy by taking many important measures, we are still in shambles. So, what exactly is the present scenario in India? What are the challenges before our economy? What are the challenges before government? And what exactly again needs to be done in the coming future? That is something we must know. For this, we are invited a very renowned personality, Professor Kishore Deshpande, to address us. I'm sure his guidance, his talk will immensely benefit us to understand the economic scenario of India that exists today and what exactly has to be done in future. I welcome Kishore sir here. I'm very grateful to him that in a single message he accepted my invitation and readily agreed to address our students and staff. Sir, I heartily welcome you to your, I heartily welcome you with your virtual presence here with Prerna College of Commerce. Over to Rutuja.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a delightful start. It is because of your guidance and support we have organized this webinar to encourage students to explore their knowledge for the same. Now, let me have the privilege to introduce our today's guest speaker, Professor Kishore Kulkarni, sir. He is the Distinguished Professor of Economics at the Metropolitan State University of Denver, Colorado since 1989 and Chief Editor of International Review of Business and Economics. His extraordinary teaching skills have brought him several teaching laurels, including 2001 Outstanding Teaching Award by the Golden Key International Honor Society and Best Teaching Award by Student Economic Society 2014. He has also delivered many special lectures and seminars all over the world by traveling to roughly 30 countries. He has co-authored 160 referred journal articles which have been appeared in such journals as Global Business Review, Indian Economic Journal, Indian Journal of Economics, and many more journals in India and abroad. For his numerous research activities, Dr. Kulkarni was recognized by Outstanding Faculty Researcher Scholar Award by Golden Key International Honor Society in 1997. In 2004, the Faculty Senate of the Metropolitan State University of Denver handed him Distinguished Service Award, followed by the Extraordinary Service Award by the University President in 2010. And in 2012, the Dean of the College of Business recognized him as the first distinguished professor in College of Business. In May 2017, Non-Resident Indians Welfare Society of India honored him by Pravasi Ratan Award. Recently, in March 2019, the Federation of Business Disciplines recognized him as the Outstanding Educator Award recipient. We are honored today to welcome such a down to earth personality, and I'm sure we all will be immensely benefited by your talk. Sir will be delivering a talk on current economic scenario in India. I welcome Professor Kishore Kulkarni sir to please enlighten us with your talk. Over to Dr. Kishore Kulkarni, sir. We'll be back in 2 minutes. There are some technical errors.
अच्छा,
उनके वीडियो का आइकॉन ही नहीं है, तो उनको कहा है कि एक बार आप क्लोज करके फिर से उसको ये करो, प्रेजेंटर लिंक पे क्लिक करके, क्योंकि जब आपका चला था तब भी उनका नहीं हो पा रहा था वहाँ से वीडियो। फिर से ट्राई कर रहे हैं।
वीडियो ऑन नहीं हो रहा है।
पहले तो उनको उनका नाम ही नहीं दिख रहा था, फिर बाद में बोले कि वीडियो का आइकॉन नहीं आ रहा है करके, तभी क्लोज करके फिर से रिफ्रेश कर रहे हैं। नहीं, मराठीमध्ये तुम्ही बोलता ना, ते मराठी. ओके, तो मी एक मिनिट एक काम करते, कारण का देखो कि तुम्हाला हेल्प करते. आता गुरुवारी ओके सर, गुरुवारी कशाप्रमाणे गुरुवारीचं नाव आहे सर.
I got you. Very good. Can you hear me, Dr. Joshi?
Sir, good morning.
Excellent.
Sir,
Excellent.
very happy
good.
to see you.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. See, the problem, or at least the blessing, was that I could hear everything on my computer, the introduction and everything, but you couldn't see me, or neither could you hear me. But now we got straightened it out.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Are we
yes.
okay now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Very good, very good. And I guess everybody else can hear me too then. Very good. Well, thank you again for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be with you this morning for you. We are at almost 8 o'clock p.m. in Denver, Colorado. So we are about 12 hours behind you guys.
Exactly.
And I know so pretty soon that means it is our bedtime. So if anybody thinks that I'm talking in sleep, that is probably true, because I will be sleeping very soon here. But then my wife says that I make a better sense when I talk in the sleep. So I think we should be all okay here, because okay. Well, let me start by saying that it has been a wonderful invitation came from Nagpur, and Nagpur is a place when I was there in my young days. I was almost a teenager. I was 18 or 19 back in '73. When we came there to play a Kho tournament, all India level Kho tournament, and that's why we had a whole group of boys and girls teams, and our girls team actually won the whole all India tournament there in from Sanmitra Sangha Pune. And I have very fond memories of Nagpur because we were there almost for 8 days. and we were very close to the Patwardhan Stadium in Ajni Station. And I remember coming from Pune, how hot the food was. Puri eat very hot food, and we were trying our best to cope up with it. But it was wonderful food, and I remember all that. I remember all the a great time we had. The rickshaws were there, and are there still man-driven rickshaws there in Nagpur now, or they stopped it now? Have they stopped it, Dr. Joshi, now, or is it still there? Well, if it is, yeah, it's still there. I felt very. Uh, hello, hello.
Hello.
Yes.
Sir, we had a power cut here. In just few minutes, we'll get back to you. Just in 2 minutes, sir.
Oh, okay. So we are on the pause now.
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay.
So sorry, sir.
No problem.
Hello.
Okay, I'm not supposed to do anything, right?
No, sir. No,
Okay,
sir.
so you will do it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay, no problem. As long as I'm not supposed to do anything, I'm fine. Just let me know.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hi, Shivani.
Yes, sir. Yes,
What's that?
yes, sir.
काय म्हणते शिवानी?
सर शुरू करा.
Oh, okay.
हाँ.
Okay. Very good. So everybody can hear me now again?
Yeah, right.
Wonderful. Very good. Well, thank you. Sorry about that technical delay, but I'm glad we are back. I think uh, I was talking about my visit to Nagpur back in 1972 and all, and I know I had talked to Dr. Hatewar and Dr. Joshi. Obviously, they have explained it to me that Nagpur is a whole lot different city now than before. And obviously, in my next opportunity, I would love to come visit all of you and do this face to face rather than be on the computer like this. But I'm just so happy to be here because I know just about 3-4 weeks ago I gave a similar webinar to Sikkim, University of Sikkim, and obviously in Sikkim I don't know a single soul in Sikkim, but they claim that there were 800 students listening to me, and and I kind of enjoyed it, even if I didn't know a whole lot of people there. But now Nagpur is more to home and more closer to my heart as well. So clearly, this is a good opportunity for me. So let's get started. I think, and I think the way to get started is to talk about what has happened. And what has happened in March of 2020 is something that has never ever happened in history of definitely United States, which has a very short history of only 250 years. But even for Indian circumstances, this is something unheard of, and there is no living soul right now who would say, "Oh, I have seen something like this before happening," because this clearly has not happened ever before. And I know the comparison between US and the Indian economy is straightforward. Actually, there are a lot of comparable points between US and India because neither countries really perceived that this is going to happen. Both were progressing very nicely before March of 2020, and the growth was so impressive that nobody was really thinking that a crisis can really mess up the economic growth in such a big way. Well, in case of India, probably one can talk about 1941 plague happening, and few other diseases and some floods and some natural calamities that beset India some historical times, and probably our some of our wars were very bloody, where a lot of lives were lost. And when you compare big wars, clearly, this crisis did not take as many lives as some wars have. But what this crisis has done is that it has made our economy suffer to a very, very large extent. To give you some numbers, and these numbers are so plenty these days because whatever I say, you can get very easily on 2 or 3 websites. One is a Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, CMIE.com. That is a center, as the name itself suggests, Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, that is based in Mumbai. And CMIE.com has a good website and they have good data. Well, there is also Deloitte, another company which does independent research. They have good Indian data on their website. And if nothing works, you can always go on RBI website, which is www.rbi.org.in. So RBI, and all these 3 websites will give you plenty of information, just like what I will try to give you here. And therefore, clearly clearly the numbers are plentifully available out there. But just to revise what happened in March of 2020 is that we were progressing in a relatively good way. And as in the introductory remark, Dr. Joshi mentioned that we were impressively growing to the extent that last 3-4 years our growth, our means Indian economy's growth was the best in the world. So we were the fastest growing economy in 2016, 2017, and that growth of 8% or so kind of slowed down a little bit in 2018 to about 6%, 2019 about 5%. So we slow down a little bit, but still 5% economic growth is absolutely a very manageable, and it is a wonderful growth. Because I remember in my teenage days when I started learning economics, India was in a very unimpressive growth story. Back in 1970s, as I mentioned, we had an emergency period from 75 to 77, and in the emergency period the economic hardship was there, but all those days were gone. And I know thanks to the globalization, thanks to the privatization, thanks to the software and a computer technological revolution that helped Indian economy in last 30 years or so, we increased our per capita income as well as the GDP by almost 300% in 30 years, which was a remarkable growth for the Indian economy. So we were having a wonderful time. $2.8 trillion, and a trillion is 1,000 billion. 1,000 billion is a trillion, and 1 billion is 10 crores. So yeah, just to put it in Indian numbers, 10 crores is 1 billion, and 1,000 billions is a trillion, and we have a $3 trillion Indian economy. So multiply all that by 75 to get the rupees figure. But in any case, we have a very impressive economy of $2.8 trillion with per capita income of roughly $2,200 per person, which is clearly a very marvelous figure. Back in 1970s, we used to say Indian per capita income is 300 or 400. So those days are gone. Those days are gone. We have a very powerful economy. But in March of 2020, no thanks to this coronavirus breakout, we started stopping all the international travel, stopping all the businesses, and as all of you are quite aware, and US is no different. We had about the same thing, and in fact, we are having a second or the third wave here in US, which is worse than the first one. So right now in November, today is November 19th. On November 19th, my state of Colorado, or USA as a whole, is showing worse figures than in March. Well, India doesn't show any of that. India has slowed down quite a bit. The lockdown have actually worked in India. Lockdowns have not worked very well in US, and I think I was always talking to my Indian doctor friends and nutritionists and all, and Indian nutritionists do believe, and I think I believe in that argument too, that Indian diet is in fact very conducive to tackle the coronavirus in a nice way, and all our spices, all our other natural products that we eat in our diet. I think our spices and our hot food, yeah, maybe Nagpurians will do much better than many other Indians, because you guys eat a whole lot hotter food than many other. So clearly our diet is very helpful to tackle coronavirus. In my personal study, my older brother in Pune got a positive on coronavirus had to be in a hospital, and he's 75. Very soon he will be 76, and at the age of 75 his body could tackle the coronavirus. In 4 days out in the hospital, he did very well. I think he didn't need any manageable support for himself. His body naturally just attacked the virus very nicely, and he came home in 4 5 days. Then there are no remnants. There is nothing left of the virus in his body now. He's perfectly fine. And if that is a story which is close to my family, then I can imagine we have had several stories like that in India, because in terms of the number of Indians who have lost lives in the whole scenario from March is 150,000, and or 1.5 lakhs. 100,000 is a lakh, and so 1.5. Well, in US they just crossed 2.5 lakhs. So clearly, US has lost whole lot more lives, and obviously Indian population is 1.3 billion. And if you don't know, the US population is roughly 320 million. So it is one fourth of a population, and a whole lot more, about a lakh people dying with the same virus here as compared to India. So clearly, American diet or American resistance has not really won the war with coronavirus, but Indian diet and Indian bodies have actually done that. So that is in a way a very relief for the Indian population. All right. So the question is then, what happened in March, and how much was the loss? The loss was tremendous. The lockdowns are clearly, economically speaking, devastating situation, because I know. Just list Tuesday, I was on a TV channel here in the news. Last week, I was on the same channel, Channel 9 in Denver, Colorado, talking about the economic effects of this second and the third wave that we are getting here in US. But even in the first wave in India, and I know in my interviews, I always say to them that if we stay at home as in a lockdown, of course, we survive from the corona spread, but economy doesn't go anywhere. The economy gets into a standstill, because if we stay at home, we don't produce, and if we don't produce, then of course there is no production, there is no gross domestic product. The GDP stops. It becomes almost zero if all of us stay at home and don't do anything. And unfortunately, that's the economic truth. That's the opportunity cost, and the opportunity cost for a lockdown is a very minimal production. And if there is a minimal production, then depending upon how long your lockdown is existing, there is going to be a reduction in GDP. Well, in case of India, we got a reduction in GDP of roughly 16% 16% in less than 4 weeks or so. So within 1 to 2 months, from March, April, and May, we had a 16% decline in GDP of India. And this decline in GDP of that significant amount, if we don't produce, then of course unemployment goes up. And I know the official figures of unemployment in India are not very reliable, partly because the Indian unemployment is heavily characterized by underemployment rather than just an unemployment. And we found that underemployment, part-time work, or not, no part-time work, unemployment is very significant. Official of Indian unemployment was about 24 to 25%, which is no different from of 25% in month of April and May. Both economies suffered. Economic class, which is unsurmountable, is a we government was just one with an businesses they would have well, in India years percent 2.5%. Of India. Reserve 0.25%. In the Reserve Bank case, they have lowered the interest rate, but only to 5 or 5.5% to the interbank loans and then the bank loans. So your mortgage interest rate, I don't know the exact figure, but I can imagine it is roughly 8% or 9% in India. And that is still a very high interest rate. And it is high interest rate because even if you say that inflation is little bit higher in India and much lower in US, inflation in US is only 3% or 3.2%. In India, inflation rate this year was already increasing from 2018 to 2019 to 2020. So in 2020, our interest rate, our inflation rate is as high as about 5% or 6.9% is the latest figure that I saw for the inflation rate in India, which clearly is a manifestation. It is a manifestation of shortages that are occurring everywhere. So economic crisis has affected the inflation, has clearly affected the unemployment, and has definitely affected our production. So we are in a pretty bad shape, and the Indian government's attempts to help, in my opinion, and I know this is all according to my opinion, and even if I grant you my opinions and my solutions, I know for sure nobody's going to listen to them, and nobody listens to what I say. Yeah, not even my wife listens to what I say. So clearly, I know that none of these things that I'm expressing here with you are going. Anybody is going to listen to. They ignore it. But if you want me to propose to you, I think we have not done enough. Even if these several lakh crore numbers sound very big, partly because we have not tackled our problems very efficiently as yet. The problem like the migrants problem, the problem like high unemployment of 25%, which has now come down because we have given up on the lockdowns and more activities are going on in India. The unemployment rate has still uh, pretty high, 8 to 10%, depending upon which part of India you're looking at and how which sector you're looking at. So unemployment rate is pretty high, and if unemployment is pretty high, the aggressiveness of the policy action has to be increased. And the reason why I say that is that because the policies have not done sufficient in India as yet, and that is partly because we are not, of course, we are not at all coming to a control over the economic crisis as yet. And we need to control that because otherwise the economy can get into a tailspin. And I know economists always talk about a multiplier effect, that if something doesn't work, then something else doesn't work because this supply. For example, if the restaurants are not allowed to be open all over Nagpur, then clearly those restaurants don't order their suppliers to supply anything. So the suppliers get affected, and the suppliers who would have gotten their supplies from somebody else, they don't get their orders either. So economists just call it a expenditure multiplier in a reverse fashion. And it is via this multiplier process the economic activity shrinks even more. And if that happens, then the another economic crisis is not too far behind. And therefore policies have to be more aggressive. Here is another reason why I argue that. Because in case of US, where as much as 2.0 trillion in one act and 1.4 trillion in another act, roughly 3.4 trillion dollars, that is more than the GDP of India, were spent in less than 3 months or so. And that's how big expansionary fiscal policy US carried out. Well, Indian expansionary fiscal policy is not that great, and it has to be higher than what it was. And here is the reason. Because in case of US, as the expansionary fiscal policy is carried out, and if there is not enough tax revenue with the government, where does the treasury get the money to spend more? Yeah, that's a good question. That if there is a humongous expenditure by the government, and if the taxes are not sufficient to finance that increased government expenditure, then of course the bonds have to be sold by the treasury in the bond market. And the Department of Treasury in the US, which is a implementation branch of the US government, well, that treasury will sell bonds, and as it sells bond, that creates a national debt. And as that debt is created, in case of US, um, over the years, from 1969 onwards, we never have had a balanced budget here. We have always had a deficit budget in case of US, except for 2 years of 1999 and 2000, the last 2 years of Clinton presidency. But besides that, we have always had a budget deficit, which meant Treasury always had to borrow. And the total national debt in the US is roughly $25 trillion. And US's GDP is roughly $23 trillion as well. And mind well, India's GDP is $3 trillion. US's GDP is $23 trillion, and US's national debt is roughly $25 trillion, and that will increase even further as the government spends more. Well, in case of India, our debt to GDP ratio is only 70% of 3 trillion. So that's about $2 trillion worth debt the Indian government owes. And that is, of course, in comparison to US is a very small percentage. In comparison to many other countries, it is a small percentage as well. Something like, let's say, Italy, which has 160% of its GDP is in national debt. Japan is even worse because Japan has roughly 215% of its GDP in national debt. So in case of Japan and Italy and Spain and Argentina, the national debt is much higher. And comparing with all that, in case of India, we have done a remarkable job of not allowing that debt of the government to go up. So there is a room for Indian government to increase the debt, and in fact, there is no scare of really stopping from this expansionary fiscal policy. So we do have to spend a whole lot more than what we have been. That's, as I said, that's why our policies are not expansionary enough. The Reserve Bank of India has to lower the interest rate even further, to the point that even general public can afford the loans in, relatively speaking, in a nice way. Because if interest rate is lower, like 3% or 4%, and if your housing loans are available at 6 or 7%, just imagine how much growth there can be. And there will be. So if we lower that interest rate, so question is then, why don't they do it? Well, number one reason is that they are afraid of, and sometimes rightly so, inflation occurring. Because if too much activity is promoted by lower interest rate, and if too much activity is promoted by expansionary fiscal policy, then that may become inflationary. And our inflation is already getting much worse. But when the crisis is of this extent, which I just explained it to you, what is the extent? This is an unprecedented crisis. Nothing like this has ever happened in history of India. So why not be as aggressive as possible? And I think that's why Indian government has to be a little more aggressive than what it has been. Another reason why India is not very aggressive is because some of their very bold policy actions have not shown the results that were desired by those policy actions. The case in point is a demonetization, because demonetization was a very badly implemented policy. Even if the theoretical idea was good, then the implementation was not very optimum, and therefore the economy suffered from that, and the government obviously did not achieve as much as they wanted to achieve by taking such a bold decision. Another bold decision was GST, and GST has not really shown as good a result as it wanted. And even if it has shown some positive results, we are beset. We are beset by a crisis which needs a much stronger solution, and therefore we need some stronger solutions here. And that is so the threat of inflation is probably scaring them. The threat of another round of a badly implemented policy becoming unsuccessful, that is probably stopping them from doing anything very aggressive. But in my opinion, as I said, that more aggressive policies have to be taken by the government, and the government alone doesn't really do all this. It has to come from the private sector as well, because lot of economic growth, India is no exclusion for that, is coming from the private sector, namely the software industry. And you know miracle software industry has done in India. The technology, the computer technology, the information technology, the software solution. Obviously, all these industries have done a fantastic job and have led the economic growth of India. So there has to be some technological change coming from the private sector if we want to overcome this crisis in the shortest time period. So all in all, I'm just saying that government is responsible for helping the private sector to grow, and it hasn't done enough aggressive job of doing it. The private sector, obviously, the crisis is not completely over yet, and the private sector becomes more productive only when they are let free for at least some amount of time. But by next year or so, our private sector in India has to be coming up with a new technology of production. And there are some disclaimers. The first disclaimer I say is that this crisis, for good reasons, has not affected the agricultural sector of India as much. We have done a marvelous job even in this monsoon season in terms of production, barring aside some floods that occurred in late part of monsoon season. But barring aside all that, the monsoon has been very impressive. In fact, the migrant worker, and there were almost 2 million of them all over the country, when they went to their hometown, these are very productive workers. So they had to do something, and they got to work in agricultural sector when the monsoon came around. And therefore, the agriculture sector in India has done very well despite this coronavirus crisis. And therefore, the food production is not in a great shortage, and and it will not be, looks like. For next year, the water supply looks very good, and therefore the another round of agricultural production will be wonderful in January, February, and March months. All right, so what we are probably talking about now is that we need a aggressive government policies, and we need a private sector which is vibrant to come over this crisis as quickly as possible. But before I conclude, let me then I will be happy to take some questions from you too. But let me conclude by pointing out to you three things which coronavirus has made very uh, apparent, not just in India but almost all over the world. The first thing that is very remarkable in this crisis is that the inequality of income has increased in all over the world, and bar none. I think in all countries that has happened in the US and all. Just to give you an example, in last 6 to 8 months, in the crisis months, billionaires of US, and don't forget 1 billion is 10 crores, so 10 crores and above holders of money in US have they have accumulated 30% increase in their properties and wealth and their value. Can you believe? I mean, it's clearly rich are getting richer, while the lower strata of society, the poor people who have lost the job in the restaurant, in hotel industry, and all, they have obviously lost the job and therefore lost the income. So in case of US, the inequality of income is clearly straightforward. But same thing is true in India. I think those who had a steady high incomes, they continued protecting that income. It is the low wage workers who lost all the jobs, and therefore the inequality has increased. And that is usually a economic crisis story. Corona is no exception to that. The second thing that has happened, and I know uh, you have witnessed it, that the role of the government sector in all countries has gone up. and bar none. In all countries, the governments have been very active. So the public sector, the share of public sector has increased because of Corona, and then, that's why those who propose, and I know there are economists who have been, oh, we call them neoclassical economists, they have been proposing small government being a best government. I know when I was young, there was a saying that we used to memorize and write in our answers all the time. We used to say that the best government is the one that governs least. And I know we used to get some point for that, I bet. But yeah, we always had this drum to beat that the best government is the one that governs least. Well, guess what? None of the governments in the world have started governing less because of this crisis. In fact, they have increased their role in the economy. So gone are those days of free market, less regulation, less taxation, freer mark. So obviously, capitalism in its purest sense is going away now, and I think it will continue to go away as governments are not going to reduce their role in the future either, until the crisis is completely managed, and until we get another realization that the best government is the one that governs least. But right now, that talk and that argument is out the window. And the third important consequence of this virus is a tremendous decline in international trade,
हाँ, कब
because countries are getting more and more suspicious of each other. Yeah, I think India is a classic case where we are getting suspicious of everybody around us. China, obviously, we are very suspicious of China and Chinese goods. Of course, Pakistan, as a habit, we are always suspicious of Pakistan, and then we are obviously having a restricted and very cautious international trade, and we are not the only one. US is fighting with China in terms of international trade. The total trade volume of the world, the total world trade volume has shrunk by 18% in just 4 months of this crisis years. So that's almost one fifth of the total world trade has gone away. And that is not really speaking a good thing for a global economy, because as you know, when countries trade with each other more, they all increase their outputs, and the world production also increases. But all that, so those are the three side effects of this virus, which are quite visible to observers, economic observers of the world. And with that um, point, I will conclude what I'm saying, because I've been blabbermouthing to you for such a long time anyway, and I hope I didn't bore you with too many numbers and too much information. But to conclude, I want to really say that this has been a wonderful experience for me here, and I know none of you really have really seen me before, but I hope to see you again face to face sometime in the future. With that, I will conclude. Thanks for having me here, and I hope this was helpful for you to shed some light on some of the important things this crisis has gone. I'll be happy to take questions if you have any. Thank you, Dr. Joshi, for having me.
So I would like to ask a question.
Okay.
Suppose the rate of interest for housing and all that is reduced to the minimum possible. So don't you think that we will have a crisis like we had in America in 2008? That is called the subprime mortgage crisis. So is that possibility not there?
Is that a possibility? Well, India is not really that point as yet. And of course, the financial crisis of 2008 has taught a very serious lesson to American banks and American banking controllers, because this is what really happened and I agree with you that there were subprime loans which were many times unethical, and some of them were illegal. But these loans were a result of what Congress allowed the banks in 1999. In 1999, Congress passed an act which is called GRAM, GRAMM, GRAM Leach, LEACH, and Bliley, BLILEY. All these are congressmen. So they put forward a bill, and Congress passed this bill, which allowed the US banks to get into investment activities. And as banks were allowed to get into investment activities themselves, they were allowed to buy their own buildings, buy stocks, buy bond, buy do all kinds of financial investment. And because of that act, banks got, I think, in my opinion, overactive in investment activities. And in order to do those investment activities, they needed money. How do they get money? Of course, by lending it to the public, because loans banks are their assets, and the purchases of all these buildings and all is their liability. So they created the assets of giving loans, and that competition became very unethical. So they kept lowering that interest rate to give as many mortgage loans as possible. As I said, sometimes in a very unethical way, and sometimes in a very illegal way. But that was all approved by the Congress, and that's why that crisis really happened. And once the housing bubble came in, nobody expected the housing prices to go down in the future, and they did. And of course, that's how the crisis really began. Well, in India, we are not even close to any of that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Over to Tuja.
Any other question? Well, I guess half of them did not understand what the heck I was talking about.
No.
Maybe my Indian accent now has
They're all
changed.
commerce students, and they are really
Oh.
interested in knowing. So
I see.
they are well acquainted with the terminology and the concepts that you have spoken about.
Wonderful, very good. Well, I know after spending 44 long years in USA, I left Pune in 1976. So this is 2020. So 44 years, and I don't speak like an Indian anymore. Even if every time I give lectures in India, my Indian faculty member friends tell me, "You don't speak like an Indian anymore."
But
So
we find no difficulty in understanding you in any manner. That's a really wonderful delivery from you, and the figures and facts that you have combined has put a very clear picture of our economy before us.
thank you. Thank you very much for saying
Now,
that.
at a deeper level, we know exactly where we stand.
Correct.
Yeah. One more thing, sir.
Yes.
How much time will it take to be on the right track as far as Indian economy is concerned after this COVID-19?
Okay. Well, whenever we do the predictions, we have to make some assumptions, and I think predicting the future is a very risky business.
Yeah, of
If,
course.
if you think I am going to be right in the future, it is going to be all by luck rather than anything. But let's just assume now that we will have no lockdowns in the future,
Yeah.
and corona is actually history tomorrow, or next week or next month, and maybe the vaccines are probably coming up, so maybe it is history by the spring of 2021, which is like March or April of next year. Assuming all these things happen, and don't forget, nobody expected coronavirus in February of 2020. So there might be something brewing somewhere, and let's not blame only on China, but let's say there is another virus brewing somewhere, just to pick up a good country for that, let's say Pakistan. And assuming none of those outside shocks come to our economy, which are probably going to be a new shocks, I would say it will take about 2 to 3 years for the economy to come back. But again, as I said,
Well.
with all these stupid assumptions I just made.
I think if corona vaccine is available by the end of this year, or maybe in the initial months of January, so as you have said, 2 to 3 years will be a sufficient time for us to be on the right track economically. But if everything goes on well, but now it is said about that even this vaccine will not be very effective as coronavirus is changing its forms. So maybe it manifests in some other form, and again we are affected by the same.
Yeah,
So
and remember our assumption. Our assumption that corona doesn't change any of its form. None of those things really happen. Would they really happen? I almost bet you 100% they will not, because there is going to be an outside shock. Unfortunately, we just don't know what the outside shock is going to be. And just like there are some negative shocks, there are some positive shocks as well. Maybe is some new technology, and I can't even think about something like that happen. But how about electric cars? Let's suppose the electric cars really become very famous. We reduce the dependence on oil, and then our productivity increases much faster. Well, that's a positive shock to the economy, and that can happen as well, or any other shock can happen also. And in that case, the recovery may not even take 3 years. I will be completely wrong. The Indian economy will be on track in December of 2021. And is that possible? Of course, that is possible.
thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
You are.
Over to Tuja.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a mesmerizing and informative session. Sir has rightly mentioned some facts that crisis has made our economy suffer to a very large extent. But the recovery rate as of now has increased in India because of various steps taken on right time to prevent ourselves from a major hit by this pandemic. Sir has also mentioned that there's 16% decline in GDP of India, which is affecting the production and can even raise the unemployment. But even in this kind of situation, India have tried to manage its finance. As this economic crisis has led to an increase in inflation, policies in India have to be made more aggressive, because if we don't look after this, then the next economic crisis will not be so far. Sir has said that if India wants to lower the rate of crisis, then the service and IT sector must be given more importance, including the private sector. Once again, thank you so much, sir, for such a beautiful session. I'm sure that students might have found it to be the most wonderful and fruitful session. Really, thanks a lot. Now, I would like to invite Ms. Sakshi Shivhare ma'am to propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you.
Morning, everyone. I, Sakshi Shivhare, faculty of Commerce Department, take this privilege to propose a vote of thanks for today's program on behalf of Prerna College of Commerce to express a deep sense of gratitude to all who are present here. I would like to give a special thanks to the eminent resource person, Professor Kishore Kulkarni sir, who have excellently delivered and shared his valuable knowledge and experience with our students. Thank you once again, sir, for sparing your valuable time from your busy schedule. Now, I extend my sincere thanks to Professor R.C. Gulane, sir, our Honorable President of Prerna Seva Mandal, Dr. S.C. Gulane, sir, the Secretary of Prerna Seva Mandal. My hearty thanks to Dr. Praveen Joshi, sir, the Director of Prerna College of Commerce, for his continuous motivation, support, vision, and commitment. I must mention our deep sense of gratitude and appreciation to our officiating principal, Dr. Bharti Deshmukh ma'am, and conveyor as well as the head of Commerce Department, Dr. Shivani Katakwar ma'am, for their continuous guidance. I would like to thank my coordinator, Ms. Pooja Gadve ma'am, for her kind support. I'm also very thankful to my technical team members for their continuous support throughout this session. Thank you once again, all of you. Thank you all. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yes,
Then hearty invitation to you to visit Nagpur.
I definitely will come in my next opportunity.
Yes, sir, yes,
Thanks,
yes.
thanks for the
That
invitation.
will be a great occasion for us, and we will have one more talk from you directly. That is
I,
offline.
I will be privileged to do that. Sorry about the technical difficulty, but
No, it's okay. It
we
was from
managed it.
our end, in fact. It was
That's
not
okay.
from your end. It was from our end.
No problem. No problem. Thank you. Thank you
Listening
very
to you
much.
was a great pleasure, and it is a very enriching experience. And I really thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you very much for saying that. I really
And
am
good
very
night
happy
to
to be.
you. Good night to you.
Good night. Yeah, good night from here. And take care. We'll talk again.